around, Game Dunkers? Here I am back as your faceless, bodiless, disembodied voice MC. I hope you're all having a wonderful time, and the chat is popping over on the Discord channel, introducing our shiny new guest, award-winning goblin, an incredibly fashionable type. It is Herbert Peppard. How you doing, fella?
I'm very well, very well. Very happy to be here on this Game Jammy Jamboree. My goodness, isn't it an awesome time? I'm so happy that everyone's been here. This is like one of the highlights of my year, being able to come in here and see all of the antics that are going on, all of the designs that are coming out of people, and the parameters that are being set for a whole new round of inspirations and ideas. It's a super, super fun time. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I thought I'd come on today and talk about something that really gets inside of my mind when I'm thinking about game design and accommodating different personality types. And while there are lots of different personality types when it comes to players coming into games, two of the biggest camps that I see, and this is simplifying things considerably, are people who enjoy interacting with a game and the game mechanics, as in dice, rules, tables, the mechanical machinations that define the nitty-gritty of a game. And then there's the other people who come into a game and they're really enjoying the social manipulation, the role-playing element, the acting out, and these are both things that I enjoy, and I really enjoy performing and getting into character. But I also understand that somebody with inherent performance skills that I have can use that to dominate games in some ways. Whereas, and on the other side, I also enjoy being able to quantify and understand the game by the mechanics. But there are some people in games who like one over the other. And in games that I design, I try my best to consider both options, because I know that there are certain personality types that really enjoy being able to quantify their world, being able to look for a certainty of understanding in the game mechanics. And then there are people who don't even want to think about those mechanics and go absolutely crazy with their characterization and what some people might call emotional intelligence, or in games that are social manipulation based. So this is something I like to think of when I'm designing games, and I would like to posit and open up a dialogue today about your thoughts about how to bring one element in over another, or how to balance those two elements. Key things that I like to make sure of are to know that the mechanisms are in place so that when a player is seeing the game that you're writing and creating, they can see the mechanisms and they can choose to silently or less overtly interact with those mechanisms to be able to shape and control the game. Whereas the players who, at the same time as having the options where players are going crazy with the performance side of things, and the mechanics will complement the fun that they're having in their performance. This is a balance that I like to try and strike in the games that I'm creating, something I'd like to posit to you guys who are doing your game Jamboree today and trying to figure out, what you're bringing in, what mechanics are going to be good, what performative aspects you might want to make mechanics of, and if that's important to you in your game design, or if you're the kind of person who just really likes to dive right into the mechanics and have the fun of playing characterization just to exist around the mechanics purely. These are thoughts. This is the can of worms, and boy is it. But we've got some time here. We've got about 14 minutes left on our little chat, and I want to hear from the chats. What side of the game do you enjoy? And secondly, what devices do you like to add to your game on either one side or the other to build your games? So feel free to jump on the Twitch chat, jump in the Discord chat, wherever you are. Patty is our great floating head who's going to jump in there and reiterate those questions to me and put them out so everyone can hear them. And I'm looking forward to this discussion, guys. Go.
All right, we are summoning the chat demons to deliver us these wonderful messages.
While we're waiting, though, I'll say, for example, a game that I've written recently. It's called Small Ship Big Dreams. Some of you guys may have played it, and it's a card-based narrative game. It has a very simple mechanic in the game where when you draw cards to define your race, your character, the ship you're flying through the cosmos in, and it's assumed in the premise of the game that you're on a mission of space exploration. And I use a very simple system in that game to give you keywords that give you strengths in the game, and the keywords add to a dice roll. So I'm using the mechanics of a dice roll to guide the game, and I'm using the cards to add pluses or minuses to the dice roll. So it's a very simple mechanic, but it does give probability to the game. There is still a large scope of characterization in the game as it's written, and performance and performing to an audience and using your socials and your player skills as opposed to your character skills to control the direction of the game. But there is still the fallback mechanic that ultimately does guide the game, create probability, and stops it from being a very he said, she said experience.
All right, the first of our Grand Inquisition's rolls in for us, Herbert. We've got, oh, okay, so coming in live, we've got, I like open-ended prompts as mechanics to support both mechanics lovers and RP lovers. What do you think of questions?
Questions are a great form of interaction, and they're a very passive. And it's one of the tried and true sort of devices in a role-playing game for players to control their world. Players don't often understand that questions are a great way to control their world and their environment. It's one of the powers that they have in the game, because the games master, whatever mechanics are setting the scene in the game, if a player they won't fill in all the gaps, and the question is a device for the player to fill in those gaps. And incorporating a question as a point in a game, as a mechanic in a game that players can have to have franchise in the game, is an awesome way, I think, to sort of hand players control. So yeah, that's excellent. And if you want to break that into a simpler game, like just a simpler card game, it's a great way to hand it to people who aren't very theatrical, and it's a great prompt. Do you have any questions? And then they might come forth and be like, oh, I can ask questions? Great. What an awesome mechanic. So yeah, very good.
Alrighty, another one to get into your brain there. How you mentioned before the mechanization of social elements. How do you feel about that mechanization, and do you prefer to rely on like a group dynamic or a ruling from within the game?
Yes, so I definitely have played some games where I felt that I feel that originally games like Dungeons and Dragons, when they were first made, were made by people who wanted absolute definition to the world. So they'd break it down into its crunchiest form with dice and mechanics and such like. And that was a way they could interact with it and come away from characterization. And over the years, characterization has developed, and some games create an amazing characterization experience. But then there are some games where people have said, well, I really enjoyed the characterization, so I want to try and make a mechanic that creates a series of prompts so that we can uniquely sort of have those experiences. But I find that some games like that have those mechanics in them can be quite forced in the characterization, and especially if the game mechanics are entirely based around characterization. Again, that tends to throw it back to people who have the skills, the ability, the player skills instead of the character skills. And I think that prompts that go work in to prompt people to act without structuring those actions are really good. Much like the question, where do you have any questions about your environment, and then the people have the option to interact with their environment while potentially characterizing. But I feel that as soon as you put something like you must do an accent tag or something on it, something that forces people to characterize, it becomes much more of a novelty game than an actual problem solving or role-playing experience, because I feel that role-playing is more about psychology than it is about more about the psychology of playing a character than it is about the trappings of playing a character. I hope that answered the question. It was a little tangential, sorry.
That's all right. It's all part of the fun. So look, we've got another one rolling in here. So ooh, here's an interesting one, and this sort of plays back into the sort of design element we were talking about before. How do you feel about pre-generated characters? They help or hinder mechanics lovers versus RP lovers? And do you have a preference with pre-gens or not?
I love pre-gens. Like as a seasoned role player who's been playing for many, many years, I love nothing more than having directions laid in front of me. I think that a lot of role players very early on, they're like, I have this fantasy about who I want to be, who is my dream person, my fantasy person in this world, who am I going to be when I step into this world. And I think that's an amazing and cathartic experience to really come out of your skin, try and visualize who you could be in more ideal circumstances. But being handed pre-generated characters gives you a whole bunch of taglines, prompts, stereotypes, and archetypes to latch onto and interpret as you like. And for me, that will set me farther away from my own skin, which gets back to what I believe is the essence of role playing and is the fun for me, and also more experienced more experienced players as they develop, and some new players who just very naturally take to a role playing or a tabletop game that has characterization as a strong element. And that is my answer to the question.
There we go. Sorry, just a little mic trouble there. So look,
No,
yeah, so it's sort of that. I think you've hit on something really good there, Herbert, and that is like I guess the character as point of reference within the world, which does allow you to explore it with a bit more ease. I guess gets you ahead of that decision paralysis.
absolutely,
Uh,
absolutely. And it also allows you to, it gives you something just to go with, to run with. And if you have strong archetypes, and you don't need to have many points, like archetype points. For example, when go back to, toot my own horn and go back to Small Ship, Big Dreams, when we're defining the archetypes, your character creation is your race, you draw a card for race, one word. You draw a card for your position on the ship, again, one word. And then you draw a card for your flaw, and you have a fatal flaw, which is just like one of the seven deadly sins sort of archetypes. And those 3 points of reference are enough for most people because they're strong points of reference, just like immediately run in their head and find a character and find anchors to create characterization from.
Alrighty, so one coming in from Discord side. One can of worms I'd like to crack open is the relationship to adversarial play. Mechanics-based games often get demonized by players, sorry, as being players trying to break the GM or trying to break the game. Uh, are there adversarial styles of social manipulation play too?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you sort of touched on this a little earlier. But,
Yes. So again, this is where I feel a balance between mechanics, whether they're dice or cards or prompts, because you can have just as much fun with prompt-based social mechanics. There's a great game called Preparing for Paris that is an amazing job at complete diceless structure and but has very strong structure in the game that causes people to interact using those social prompts and can very easily back people into a corner. And you don't need to be amazing at performance to sort of make those mechanics work, but obviously it does help a bit. And that's a very enjoyable game. But getting back to the adversarial status, if people are getting using their player skills, social skills, to control a game, then as a storyteller or facilitator, the fallback ultimately is the mechanics. And as charismatic as somebody may be in person, there's a chance that the person who's listening to them may not believe what they're saying. And by giving them the stage and giving them advantages because of their player skills, you are often diminishing the other people's abilities as characters, or you can run the risk of doing that. Sorry. If they're being adversarial towards you as the facilitator, use the system. If they're being adversarial towards each other, again, that's why a system exists, so that there is a definitive resolution that can be achieved. And I find probability is a fun way for that to be resolved, again, whether that's cards or sometimes counter prompts. But really just creating a mechanism in the game that breaks you out of, that breaks a tie and breaks you out of one person dominating a situation simply because of their social activities. Or if you have two very strong social people and they're just talking at each other, some mechanic needs to break the balance. And however you create that in your game is, I believe, the fun of making a new game.
Yeah, the disclaiming of responsibility, I suppose, to the system is something that is discussed fairly frequently in our little circles, isn't it? Like you think that is something you can trust a system to do, or is that one of the big challenges, do you think?
So please repeat the question.
I was saying is like, do you think that is like do you think that is something that a system you can trust a system to do with a group that may be sort of destabilized on that social level, or is that a challenge?
Well, I think because this is the game jam, the challenge is, as game makers, to try and find robust systems that can accommodate both sides of the equation and can break those ties when they come up, whether or not it's one player dominating the games master, one player dominating another player, or two players in contest in a purely social situation. And I know that people want to have those arguments, but at the end of the day, you need to have a resolution. And this is where I like to look to psychology of the characters and making people make roles or creating mechanisms that will say, well, you must bow to this. In this instance, you must bow to this because this person has successfully beaten you, and so they have successfully contested you. Because otherwise, you'll just get stuck in a situation where they're going to argue endlessly. And look, there's a lot of fun in games where you have an argument and one person wins and the game moves on, and then much later somebody brings up the same argument or another iteration of the same argument and another contest is had, and sometimes that can snowball and it can escalate, and that's really fun and fun to explore because that's, again, psychology and character interactions and mechanical interactions, but making sure that every time those interactions happen, there is a short-term resolution that can lead to continuation and flow of the game, so you don't hit an impasse.
A bit of the old constraints. Constraints are strong fuel for creativity, I suppose.
I feel so. In the same way that those 3 key points to define characters in Small Ship Big Dreams, it's just like use these 3 key points. They define a character. Just strong key points, strong mechanics that encapsulate the essence of the game that you're making. Because I believe that every game, you should always come up with the concept of the game overall. Like, what's the story? What's the environment? What's the feel of the game? And then afterwards, make the mechanics and make mechanics that complement what the game needs to do and what the game wants to do. That's my opinion of how to create a game. I think that creating a system first will box you into what you think a game should be and will drive the themes and ideas and can create an abstract disconnect or a disconnect between what you want the game to do thematically and what the system's doing with the game. Creating harmony by designing the game first and then designing the system for the game, I believe, is more important and rewarding in my experience designing games.
One thing that I'm noticing coming up in the chat a bit is, yeah, I guess coming back to that, what's the word, player skill versus character skill element, and like part of it is, I suppose we exist in a sort of half and half state where in the areas rules don't cover, you have to rely on those soft skills. And one phrase that's come up is, convince me that your character can do it.
I do both, like when it's convince me your character can do it, like again, lean heavily if you want to as a games master, make them do the monologue. That's you leaning on their player skills. And I think that's a balance. So, and this is a good point actually. So if you have a player who is relying heavily on the mechanics and they're going to succeed, or maybe they will likely succeed, or they do succeed and they use a mechanic to succeed, and you're like, great, how do you succeed? So they feel good because they've achieved something, and you're like, awesome, now act out how that happens, and then they should, and even if it's not act out how it happens, you can say describe how it happens. So you give them the option of being, I'm theatrical and I'm going to first person act it out, or I'm creative and I'm going to storytell a third person describe how it all plays out, but using the mechanic as a springboard to lead to elevating the player skill level is an awesome thing to do. And it works, of course, the other way, where you have the person who's very flamboyant and doing, I can do anything. And you're like, great, just roll the dice or just draw a card. Let's see if that happens or if it's all in your head.
I suppose sort of playing with that idea a little. Do you have any, I guess, favorite examples of that sort of scenario where the mechanic really cultivates the experience that you think the game was meant to be? Like one of those little sort of a light bulb over the head kind of moments.
I love one of my favorite examples for this, or just what's popped into my head at the moment. There are actually other indie games that do it really well, but I think it started as a Kickstarter, but the system that runs the Aliens game, and I know it was a standalone system before it was used for the current Aliens game, and it's a horror system mechanic, and it has a stress dice system in the game where the more stressed you get because of horrific things happening around you, the more your stress builds, and every point of stress translates to a stress dice, and those stress dice add to the pool of dice that you roll to succeed in any given situation. But the stress dice also have a potential failure on them, a breakdown where you'll psychologically break down if you roll too many of a certain result on those stress dice. So by being more stressed, it elevates your potential for success, but it also elevates your potential for complete psychological breakdown, which I think as a horror game mechanic is one of the most exciting mechanics that I've seen brought into a new game in recent years. That was very fun to play, very thematic.
Sounds like it gives a very sort of tactile element to the horror, like the physical act of holding those extra dice adds to the tension there.
The other great game that does that is, the name of the system escapes me, but you'll probably be able to look it up with a quick web search, which is the one that uses Jenga as the game system. And again, it's a horror game system, and every time you try and pass a test, you have to draw another block from the tower. And if the tower collapses, the person drawing the block will die.
I believe that's Dread. I think that's the one. But yeah. So look, we've got, as I said, you've kicked off a lot of action here, Herbert. Not a great number of questions, but I think people are really locking onto the theme of comfort within the game, I guess, which is which you seem to have ascribed a bit to, like solid mechanical support that people can retreat into if they're not sure of something. And yeah, what do you think is the best way to sort of build that, I guess? Like, where I guess the mechanics are accessible and easier to reach for in the event that things seem unsure.
I always love a game that has a card that's right in front of you that just runs through the list of things that you can do in the course of the game. It's just a touchstone, it's a go-to, and it's a silent prompt. But also, when it comes to each player turn, either the game's facilitator, or if it's a game that does not have a facilitator, where everyone's playing as equal parts in the game, that the cards or the prompts that exist in the game should have, I believe, are elevated by having a few different entries on the card that, in and of themselves, the mechanic in and of itself prompts the option for extra behavior. So you can say, your character does a thing, describe how this happens. And the player can have the option of going, my character does this thing, and they can then either be more or less creative with the second option of branching out and being floral, or the reverse again, where you say, describe your scene in the card or in the game system. It's like, put the emphasis on the performance, but then break it down to a mechanic that allows whether or not that performance succeeds or fails. A very good way for that to happen, I've seen, is a voting system where parties, I think it's Preparing for Paris, has a similar mechanic where everybody then votes on whether or not that person succeeded or failed in their social endeavor, or the person who's subject to it gets to choose based on the success or failure. So you can have fun, dynamic games that are all role playing, so long as there is a touchstone that you can go back to. And much like with the system, if you're having more system, you want people to be able to fall back into a system and have retreat into it if they're not feeling so flamboyant. Still always have the option of the prompt in the system built into the game that encourages them, but doesn't make it compulsory for them to elucidate and elaborate.
All right. I think the Grand Hive Mind has spoken there, Herbert. So yeah, look, thanks for taking us through all of these little questions the folks have had for you.
No
We
worries. Look, it's my short and sweet amount of time, and it's been lovely to spend it with you. I just wanted to open that can of worms because it's something that always kicks around in my head when I'm designing games. Is how do I accommodate for as many people as possible? Because everybody who plays your game is going to engage in a completely different way, and they're not going to see it the same way that you are. Which is one of the most valuable things, is to get any old rough version of your game out there, like in a game jam, hand it over to a group of people, have it tested, and see how it plays in other people's hands.
Yeah, sort of letting go of that control is a big move, but it's what these games are all about, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, was there anything you wanted to add as sort of a sign off there, Herbert? Where can these lovely folks find you?
Look, I'm kicking around. I'm very excited to be back at PAX. Fingers crossed, touch wood, this year in October with Tabletop Dynasties. I got a whole range of new dice charms. If you want to look at the cephalopede, so Herbert Peppard, I make dice charms. I'm peddling false hope to the masses. Go check out my cephalopede. That's like an octopus with feet, cephalopede, on Instagram, and check out some of my new dice charms. We're going to have some hard copy prints, fingers crossed if the printers do it in time, for packs of Goblins of Zarth, which is exciting, and maybe even Small Ship Big Dreams. If not, I'll be there with all of the art crew playing indie games in the indie game section in the evenings, and I'm going to really look forward to seeing you all there. Have a great game jam, guys.
Thanks again, Herbert.
My pleasure.